Welcome to GSD Fails, episode 1. So if you saw our teaser go out last week, you saw that we're launching this new initiative, GSD Fails, as a way to highlight stories of resilience, because people during this time, this COVID adventure, this COVID experience, everybody's dealing with something. And some people are dealing with things that are far heavier than others. And we don't have our normal community, our normal means of connecting. And so we're looking to bridge that gap. We're looking to offer Medal of Honor stories, stories of people that you're like, oh my gosh, how did they do that? I wish I could. We could call them Mighty Mighty Boss Tone stories. Remember that Never Had to Knock on Wood song, Lee? That was amazing. But we're also going to highlight professional stories of professional failure, because we believe that the mindsets are not dissimilar when you have to move past a fail. And so the premise of this GSD Fail series is sometimes we fail in life, and sometimes life becomes an epic fail. But people can rise to become something new, someone better than they could have been without the fail. And so, without further ado, I would love to introduce Hannah Kay. Hannah Kay, tell us who you are.
Hi, perfect. Thank you so much, Tim and Lee. Guys, thank you so much for having me and highlighting my story. I'm so grateful to be here with you all. So my name is Hannah Kay Herdlinger, and I am the founder of Thread Talk. And I'm so excited to have this opportunity to share my personal story and journey with you guys today. So my story and journey really started back years ago. So little background, I was born and raised in the South. I then went to college at the University of Georgia, where I fell in love. I met this guy, we were college sweethearts. I actually met him my first week in college, and we dated on and off in college. And then I moved to Washington, D.C., and I interned on Capitol Hill for Senator Mark Pryor. And then from there, I actually moved over to Facebook, and that is where I met Tim. And I was so excited to meet Tim there, and I just loved meeting you and having that awesome relationship with you.
Well, I feel like that's a story in itself that needs to be told. So for people that don't know me personally or haven't worked with me, I'm fairly amazing. And my amazingness is infectious because I feel like I need to walk around the office to different teams that I work with and find out when they don't look like they're having fun. And then I take it upon myself to bring fun to them. So I was doing that one day. I was walking around this area of Facebook, and I was like, hey, you guys look like you're having a very heavy day. Let me lighten it for you. And everybody was like, thank you, Tim. Thank you. But hey, meet the new person because we're tired of hearing from you. But she is not. And so I got introduced to Hannah Kay, and I said, oh, you seem cool. I'm going to connect with you on LinkedIn. I'll see you later. And then that night, I got a message on LinkedIn from Hannah Kay, and I was like, oh, sweet. She actually does want to connect with me. And but the message was not the, hey, thanks for connecting. Look forward to coffee sometime. It was different. And Hannah, I was wondering if you could tell us about that message.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you. I'm so glad you chimed in, because you're much better at telling that story than I. I will never forget the day we met. You wore that glitter that sparked my day that day too. So yes, so as I was going, like, I'm tying this back into my story. So when I met my college sweetheart, then I moved to Washington, D.C., interned with Senator Mark Pryor. Then I went and worked at Facebook in Washington, D.C. And as I was working at Facebook in Washington, D.C., I then sort of had been reconnecting with my college sweetheart, and we never really lost touch. But then we really reconnected, and we got engaged, and then we got married, and life was amazing. He moved to Washington, D.C. with me, and then he was from Georgia, so we actually moved back down to his hometown. And I was still working with Facebook and still, everything looked perfect on the outside. We both had great jobs. We were living in small town Georgia, but everything behind closed doors was not as picture perfect as it looked. I had been keeping a secret, and that secret was that I was in a domestic violence relationship. And behind closed doors, it really was not so perfect. And it didn't happen overnight, slowly and surely. It started with the verbal abuse, and then it turned physical. And I would be, remiss to say that I didn't leave the first time it got physical until one night. And it was Super Bowl Sunday, and this was 2014. And it turned super physical. And it just entirely changed my life. And it started out just a normal night. And then before I knew it, the doctor said, had one hip been slightly harder or to the right, that I could have ended up in a coma and I could have also died. Now, I want to take that and I want to go back, because that also does not just happen again, kind of overnight. There were different things, but this was the severity of it now. But when you go back and you look, there were these signs that I probably really didn't know. Maybe I'd heard them, but I always thought, oh, this doesn't happen to me. This isn't domestic violence. This is just, oh, I said the wrong thing. Oh, I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't have done that. And the truth of the matter is, even at the first sign of any type of domestic violence, take a look deeper. And had I done that, maybe it wouldn't have gotten so deep. And so now I'm going to take you back to that night when Super Bowl Sunday 2014, and hearing those words from my doctor that I could be in a coma and I also could have died. That was a wake-up call from me, because I had known for quite some time that I needed to leave, but now I knew if I didn't leave, I could easily wind up dead. And so I decided to divorce my husband, and that is not an easy decision. Some people say, like, well, of course, the writing's on the wall, but it is absolutely not the case. I loved him. There was a reason we got married. And so going through those steps, I was very fortunate to have the people who, my doctors in the hometown, the people who lived across the street, to be able to kind of call and help me and get through that. And one of the very first people that I told was, in fact, my boss, and that was Cheryl Sandberg. And I was very fortunate to have a boss like Cheryl, because she not only gave me or I called and I told her what had happened and I asked for time off. And she not only gave me that time off that I requested, but she also gave me an opportunity to start a brand new life. She gave me an opportunity to come out to California and work at Facebook headquarters, which is where I met Tim. And to have a boss, someone who, doesn't always know, because we don't always talk about what goes behind closed doors. But the second I let her in, just opened her arms and gave me that brand new life. And so from there, I was able to just really start that new life. There, she offered me a job working at her nonprofit, Lean In. And that's really where I found my voice. And my message, going back to Tim, was really about my story about domestic violence. I realized while I was there that I needed to start sharing my story. And the more I started sharing my story, the more I found people like me, people like Tim, who I just noticed on LinkedIn was this awesome advocate and doing amazing things for domestic violence survivors that I would have never, thought about and really connected with them. And so then to take it one step further, before I moved to California, I had heard of domestic violence shelters, but I'm going to be honest, I I didn't know much about them. And I've now learned that many other people thought kind of the same thing, that it's a place that you just, a cot, you lay your head while you have some time off. That is not the case at all. Domestic violence shelters are the safety, security, and the programs, as well as the comfortable bed and really everything a victim of domestic violence needs to move forward. And so before I moved to California, I packed up the contents of my dream home that I had with my ex-husband, and I donated them all to the domestic violence shelter, local domestic violence shelter. And whenever I moved out to California, that shelter just stuck with me. I kept thinking about that first shelter and how domestic violence shelters remain overcrowded and underfunded. And I knew that I was fortunate to have the surrounding people around me to help start that new life. Because I can't tell you enough, I was at rock bottom. I was at complete rock bottom. I had no idea how I would come out, and telling this story now, I can tell it just as, talking about it, but I couldn't then. I even took a picture of myself because I was crying so much and so hard, and I still have that picture. Yes, I was black and blue still, but I was crying, and I said, I want to remember this moment. I said, I want to remember this moment because I want to know how I can thrive and survive and look back and say, look where I am now. And that is exactly where I am. I have since left Lean In and Facebook, and I started my own company called Thread Talk. And this is a company that sells cozy, soft blankets and donates back to domestic violence survivors. And I did this because I really want to help other people share their story, let them have this certain outlet to get through. And I just really, let me say this too. When you start a business like me, I knew nothing about business, right? Like, I didn't know how to start a business. I just said, I want to start a business to help victims of domestic violence. And I knew nothing about blankets. I knew nothing about business. I knew nothing about selling anything. But I picked up the phone and I just started calling random manufacturers. And I was like, I know nothing about blankets, but I know I want to sell them. And my reason for selling blankets was because I learned that blankets and linens were some of the most requested items in shelters. And there's just something cozy about blankets, right? When you're wrapped up, it's just really cozy. And so then I originally was going to do blanket for blanket, but learned that domestic violence shelters need so much more than that. They need the simple items like, laundry detergent and bed sheets and bed towels. And so I decided to donate 10% of our proceeds to fund those wish list items of domestic violence shelters. And so, circling back, whenever I was calling these manufacturers, I was straight up and I would tell them, I know nothing. What can you teach me? And I would take what I learned and call the next one and call the next one. And now I'm proud to say that Thread Talk, we are coming up this October on 3 years, and we have now donated over 45,000 wish list items, from beds and cribs to laundry detergent, deodorant, shampoo, so many different items that are truly changing people's lives. And I am just so proud of that. And I still look back at that photo of me crying and saying, look where I've come and look how far we have to go.
Wow. Hannah, thanks for sharing your story. And yeah, I remember that LinkedIn message to where you said, oh my gosh, that's amazing that you do domestic violence work. Like, we need to have coffee. And when I sat down with you and you showed me that picture, you put your phone up and I saw that picture of your bruised face. And it was surreal because that was not the person that I had just met. It was kind of crazy that our second conversation ever started off with that picture.
I don't know that I've shared this with you, and I'm about to share it to the public, but you were one of the very first people that I showed that picture to, that hadn't seen me in person with that, because now when I moved out to California, you couldn't see the bruises. Whereas when I was in Georgia, those people had seen me out. We were in a small town. And I mean, I met you, I think it was like my first day. It was very soon after.
Yeah, it was like your second day.
Yeah, it was so soon. And so you were one of the first people to see that picture who had not seen the physical bruises on my face.
And the reason I wanted to have you on was because that's, first of all, just such a crazy story, that you were not poor, you're not in a terrible situation. You had an amazing career already, high school, college sweetheart, and yet you found yourself in that situation. I want to know, what were the difficult decisions that you had to make to get past that situation and move on? And how did you come to the point where you could make those decisions?
Absolutely. So, I used to say out loud, if someone ever hit me, I would leave in a second, never imagining that I would actually be faced with that. And so those difficult decisions was the first time that hands were laid on me, and that I kind of remembered what I had said, but then I was sort of like, oh no, that's just a one-time thing. It won't happen. I'm not going to leave. But I think that some of the most difficult decisions were when I realized that I needed to leave, or else I could wind up dead the next time. You never know what's going to happen. And I thought that I would be judged. I thought that I would be stigmatized. I thought that having that big divorcee when we had only been married a short time, though I knew him and, we dated off and on for 10 years before we got married. We had not been married for long. We were only married for 2.5 years. That's not a long time. So I really thought that I would be judged and stigmatized, and I would be lying if I said I considered staying again, even after that, because I was so afraid. And I also want your listeners to know that I thought that, and I got out, and I have not felt that being judged or stigmatized. It was all in my head. And so that was kind of the thing that I really dealt with. But once I made that jump, it was great.
Hannah, to be honest with you, I'm quite blown away with your story. Actually, I'm quite emotional, and I commend you. You're a phenomenal woman and human being, and I love what you've told us today. And it's amazing for me how you've remained so passionate and infectious about your story, because it's tragic, yet I love the fact that you're our first guest on GSD Fails, and it's so powerful for me. So thank you so much. The only question I'd love to ask is, how can we help? How can we help the victims of domestic violence? What can we do better? Is there anything that we can do?
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of tied that back in perfectly to answer this question too, because you called out that, yes, I am a domestic violence survivor, but just by seeing me, you have no clue. What I want people to understand is, and also with my brand, with Thread Talk and my company, and when I speak, I don't want people, yes, I want people to understand the severity of domestic violence, but it is not always black and blue. It's not always right here where you can see it. Many people can hide their bruises. Maybe it's not bruises. Maybe it is just the verbal and emotional abuse, because that is also abuse. And it doesn't necessarily have to be this dark, dreary thing. And so those are the things that I want people to really understand. Listen to people. The very thing that I say all the time is, if there's any question, ask if someone's okay. Just by asking a simple question could help lead somebody to open up, because it just takes that one time for someone to say, hey, I'm not okay. Hey, did you know what just happened last night? Like, you can't see this on my face, or I'm hiding these bruises or something. So check in with people, especially while we're here and the world is kind of locked down. Check in on your neighbors, check in on your friends. And more importantly, just let people know that it's okay. It's okay to talk about domestic violence. And the more that people talk about it, the more that people understand that it can happen to anyone. And so that is really what I want people to know, is that it's not just the black and blue pictures that you see depicted in domestic violence, though yes, that is it. And if anyone needs any help, there are tons of resources available. And for me, the one that I work with is domesticshelters.org. And when you log on to their website, you plug in your zip code, and all the shelters and resources that are available right there are right there. So that's something as well.
Like Lee said, I'm more emotional than I expected. And I think part of it, just like, I think any of us have maybe experienced relationships, or, a parent, or, a friend that may have experienced something similar at different varying degrees. And you're kind of thinking back on what could I have done? What could I have said? And so I'm really glad you had the opportunity to come on and speak with us. The question that I have, you have if people don't know Sheryl Sandberg, I wonder if they've been paying attention the last decade. So you had a really, I think, unique situation to be engaged with a leader who's known for being empathetic and engaged and very turned on and plugged into this, to kind of having a safety net for you. Are there things for either, our viewers or us as leaders, where you could say there's one or two things that Sheryl did, or Facebook did, or that you do now that were really helpful or beneficial, that from a leadership perspective? Because I think in some situations, as a leader in kind of an employee-employer relationship, you don't want to cross boundaries, but we invest so much into our work and work into us, being kind of trusting and engaged and happy, makes a lot of difference. So anything that you can shine on or point to from that perspective?
Absolutely. Thank you. That's a great question too. So when you think of being in a workplace and working all day, every day, then all of a sudden, I could not move. I could not physically move after. I needed this time off, and I didn't know how much time off that I needed. And so for my boss, for Sheryl, to be able to say, take the time, like, just take time off and recover, and really not just physically, but emotionally, and realizing like my life is completely over. And so for leadership to understand that they're really number one, let me back up. Number one, make sure that person is safe. Like that's the very first thing that I should say. And that is what Sheryl did to me too. And that is the number one thing for anyone. That is the first question I always ask. Are you safe? Can I come get you? Can I do something? And if the answer is yes, you're safe, then I want people to understand to allow this time for people to heal, because taking that extra time made all of the difference. And I know not everyone can work for a company or a person who can say, hey, look, I'm going to move you clear across the country to start a new life. But just giving that time and saying, here's a time, we're here if you need us, but we don't expect you to be working just like you are, because it's difficult. And that is also a conversation that I believe companies really need to have, and to also be able to provide those resources and say, look, right here in your community, here are the shelters, here are the programs, here are the counselors, here are the everything you need, and to have that readily available for employees.
Wow. Hannah Kay, thanks for coming on. Not trying to be weird, but like you've actually, like your friendship and just the fact that you opened up and shared your story with me on our second conversation, you've actually made me a better person. For a lot of people that know my background, I spent my 20s in Iraq. I've spent my life in the security industry in very dangerous situations, whether it be doing executive protection or working with, victims of domestic violence and trying to help them become a survivor. But I've put myself in situations to where I've had to have the courage to move forward because there's no other choice. But the bravery and courage that you display is a different kind altogether because you truly did have the choice. And so I want to throw this out there, hashtag bruised heart. When you talk about that the bruises aren't always on our face, we can't always see them. And, especially during this COVID time, when you talk to somebody, how are you doing? And you can tell things are not right. Sometimes we let that go and we think it's not our business. Sometimes we say, no, I can tell there's something not wrong. We push them into a corner. So I'd like to submit a different way to deal with this. When you ask somebody how it's going and they say, oh, it's fine, but you can tell it's not, open up with a moment of vulnerability about something you're struggling with, even if it's small. Because if they know you're also struggling, they may not let you in then, but that will stick with them. Because Hannah, when you saw my LinkedIn profile and that I had that interview with that survivor of domestic violence, that showed you that I was open to support you. And we need to show people vulnerability to let them know that we're there to support them. Any last things to say, Hannah Kay?
Yeah, no, I think yes. And that is one of the things that I have also learned too, and why I do share my story. I didn't think that I would ever share my story. I thought like, oh, no one has to know. I'm starting a new life. Like I could keep this a secret. But the power in sharing your story and sharing, Tim, the work that you've done. I mean, yes, that led me to dip my toe in the water a little bit and see, is this a safe place? Can I kind of say this? And the answer is yes. And so then we create safe places for other people to let in. So I encourage everyone to share their story. Know that you are not alone, because I also had never personally met, or so I thought, met another domestic violence survivor. And once I started sharing, they also started sharing. So people in my circle that I knew but didn't know from before. So the power of storytelling. And yes, I love that hashtag bruised heart, because the bruises aren't always there, but the heart is definitely bruised. Thank you guys so much for having me and allowing me to share my story today.
Hannah Kay, thanks for coming on. You're amazing and we love you.
We love you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah.